Welcome. This breakout session is titled Prioritizing Driver's License Issues and Changes to Minnesota Statute. If you have any questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. Also, if you have any technical difficulties, please email info@mnjrc.org or text 612-361-3951. I would now like to turn it over to your presenters for today. Enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. We're super delighted to be here today and share the information that we have learned and how the changes for the Minnesota driver's license will help clients get back on the road. We are super excited to share with you how we helped remove some of the barriers to get our clients back on the road. So we're going to do our best during our time to provide you an overview of how we united together. We took some clients' information. We took a specific client to testify at the Capitol, formed a reintegration driver's license bill, and also a team of people who had never met before 8 years ago came together and accomplished this. So first of all, the presenters today are going to be myself, Jamie Rigling, Anna Odegaard, and Eve Runyon. I'm going to let Anna introduce herself and the agency she's with, and Eve introduce herself, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we'll go through the history, and we'll go through how we got to where we are today. So Anna, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. Just really happy to be here today. I work with the Fines and Fees Justice Center, which is a national advocacy organization really focused on a more equitable funding structure for our criminal legal system. And particularly by eliminating or reducing fines or fees that create an excessive burden on low-income and BIPOC communities. When I was doing this work with Jamie and Eve, I was part of the Minnesota Asset Building Coalition, so I may have run into some of you through that work as well. Great to be here.
Excellent. And good morning, everyone. My name is Eve Runyon. I am the president and CEO of Pro Bono Institute, which is a national nonprofit organization that is focused on justice issues. And our work primarily focuses on getting law firms and companies to organize their lawyers to provide free legal services to underserved communities. My role with regard to the session today is I'm also on the steering committee and a part of the Minnesota Collaborative Justice Project, and we'll tell you more about that project as part of the session.
Thank you. So now for my introduction, my name is Jamie Rigling. I've been employed at U.S. Probation and Pretrial Services in the District of Minnesota as the Community Intervention Administrator for about 4 years now. Prior to that role, I spent 9 years working at the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Waseca, Minnesota, as the Reentry Affairs Coordinator. In addition to my combined years of experience working with this population, I'm also the daughter of a father who spent a year in the Stillwater prison back in 1973. So I kind of know what it's like to live the justice-involved life through the family life. And also in 2019, my brother was released from a state prison and he came to live with me. So I got to walk alongside him as he got everything back in order. And how I met Eve was through the Collaborative Justice Project, and she came into the prison in 2015, I believe. I think we decided it was that long ago. And her agency incorporated Project Connect and through the Collaborative Justice. And then through that, I met Hillary. Eve will talk a little bit more about Hillary when she presents. But Hillary is now someone that works with me resolving individual driver's license issues. So we take referrals and we pick apart their cases. And then through that, through the Collaborative Justice, we also met Joelle Sather, who works at Hennepin County, who knows the nuts and bolts on how to resolve these individually. So as we were working to resolve these individually, I did a project, I did a little study, and I took 938 clients in federal probation who had driver's license issues. Actually, I didn't do it. I would be honest with you. Students helped me do it, and they have now moved on in their careers. But I had them analyze all the data, and we found that only 615 of our clients had valid driver's license of that 938. There were only a handful that we couldn't figure out what their driving status was. And because we were all using public websites and we didn't go through the private DMV one, we just couldn't capture all that data. But look at the percentage of this, 65%. That's huge when you're talking all of Minnesota. I have people in Worthington, Minnesota, little towns in northern Minnesota where the DMVs are mixed with, and I was just at one in northern Minnesota. This is how I know. It's mixed in with a gas station. It's up by Red Lake. So we're talking people in isolated places without driver's license. So we dissected this project, and then we also broke it down to what was really happening. Was it revoked? Was it why was, and there were 201 of those clients that had significant issues, like 21%. And I'll be completely honest with you, that is not even part of my role. I just found a passion for it. So I had to squeeze it into all of my other responsibilities. And then we united with this team. One day on one of my, oh my goodness, driver's license issues, Gina Evans asked me, do you know Anna Odegaard? And I'm like, no. She's like, you should. And that was less than 2 years ago. So we formed this powerhouse team kind of at the last minute to work with some of these legislative changes. I still have 101 people under probation right now that don't have their driver's license because we're working to pick them apart. We're calling hearing officers. We're trying to get the pathway for everyone's individual cases. And I also at the last minute decided that since we're always talking demographics, how are we going to break this down by racial breakdown? And we have 16% Native Americans, 32 of the Native Americans under supervision up where I was saying up in Red Lake area, don't have it. It's hard to get. The access to getting to the DMV is limited. And so we took all this information and we took it to the Minnesota Collaborative Justice, and we decided that this would be a good project for making legislative changes. And to do that, I'm going to show you a quick video of how we got to this point.
Thank you. And then we have Mr. Gentle also to offer some testimony.
Welcome, Mr. Gentle.
Can you
Please
see
introduce
that?
yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Devil and community members. My name is Javon Gentle. I have been married for 17 years and have 10 children. My wife and I have owned a carpet cleaning business in Savage, Minnesota for nearly a decade. In 2019, I was sentenced to 2 years of time in federal prison in Elkton, Ohio. In June of 2020, I learned that I was not eligible for placement at a halfway house because of the amount of traffic tickets I had prior to my incarceration. That was not helpful. I needed to be in Minnesota so I could meet with the DMV agents and attend court hearings related to these outstanding tickets. I contacted Jamie at Probation, and she connected me to an attorney who helped clear up a couple tickets to remove the detainer so that I could be transferred to Minnesota to sort out the rest of the fees and fines I had. When I arrived at the halfway house, I learned that I had over $5,000 in outstanding court fees from tickets that were decades old. I had several court hearings and made agreements with courts while paying fees. Little did I know, by paying some of the tickets, the punishment would continue for 6 more months. When I found that out, I am glad that I had a good support system because it hit me hard. My self-esteem started going down and the fees started to kick in. I almost gave up and went back to the lifestyle of driving without a license. I was putting strain on my family and friends. I was putting strain on my family and friends, and I had already served my time of incarceration and was ready to live a meaningful life abiding by the driving's laws. Because I didn't have a valid driver's license, I missed out on employment opportunity. One of those was making $24 an hour. I was not able to help help out with my part of the business to drive the carpet cleaning business van. Worst of all, I couldn't drive my kids to and from school or to their sport activities for the past couple years. I'm happy to report 2 weeks ago today, at the age of 42, I'm a valid driver, and I drove here today legally with car insurance to pursue you to pass this important law. Having driving privilege increase my self-esteem and motivate because it allows me to shift their transportation needs for our family. There is nothing more satisfying than dropping off and picking up my kids from school. I can run errands and drive the family van to clean carpets now. I know my friends and family and my wife are happy because it was draining on their time and energy giving me rides all the time. It is my hope that nobody else goes through this type of barriers for 2.5 years like I did because of mistakes I made in my 20s or 30s. Thank you, Chair Devil and community members. Please consider how important it is to have a driver's license upon release from incarceration to generate an income to pay the fines.
Thank you, Mr. Gentle.
That is always such a heartwarming story for me because I worked with Mr. Gentle for 2 years. And for those of you in the audience that aren't familiar with the Bureau of Prisons and U.S. Probation, the Bureau of Prisons has over 120 institutions. And just because someone has their court of jurisdiction or they were incarcerated or they were convicted in Minnesota, it doesn't mean that they're going to be designated or incarcerated in a Minnesota facility. Even though we have 4, there's Federal Medical Center Rochester, there's FCI Sandstone, there's FPC, which is a prison camp, Duluth, and then there's where I worked at the Federal Correctional Institution in Waseca. Oftentimes, our people are designated to a penitentiary, which can be anywhere in the United States where all the 121 prisons are. In fact, he was in Elkton, Ohio. And if you're a female, you have even less institutions to choose from. There's less than 7 secure institutions. There's some camps all around, but I found this really important when I was working at the prison, and I actually learned my best when I took a few inmates to be town drivers and learned the hiccups of getting the marriage license, the changing the name, all the things. So I hope you learned a little bit from that today. I'm going to pass it over to Anna, and I'm also I'll always make my email address available if you have questions, if you want presentations, not individually, but in larger groups. We're happy to do that. So thank you. And I'll pass it over to Anna.
Thanks, Jamie. I am really grateful for people like Jamie, and I imagine some of you on the call today who spend a great deal of time trying to help folks who are facing hurdles or challenges to getting their license reinstated, helping those folks navigate those hurdles. I learned a lot about this as I was doing advocacy on the issue. What I want to share with you today is some of the recent changes to Minnesota statute related to driver's license suspension and revocation that we worked on in order to remove some of those hurdles. I want to make sure, I think it's important that not only individuals that are struggling with a license suspension or revocation, but also practitioners that are trying to help folks navigate that challenge, understand what the law is now. It has opened up some pathways back to reinstatement that I think will be helpful. We know that implementation has not been perfect or uniform, which makes it even more important that folks know what their rights are, so that if somebody's being given, incorrect information, that they can reach out and find a remedy for that. So, Jamie, if you don't mind sharing my slides, I'm going to get a little bit technical here because I think it's important for folks to know the details. And then happy to answer any questions, of course, at the end of this session about the recent law changes. Sometimes it takes just a minute for the slides to share. Okay, I'm going to just start an overview, Jamie, while you get the slides up. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to go over 3 recent changes to Minnesota statute that I think are relevant for folks that are really working on license reinstatement. One of them is the end of driver's license suspensions for failure to pay or failure to appear on a traffic ticket, and for a conviction on driving after suspension or revocation. Thanks, Jamie. This is my overview slide. So that's number 1. Ending license suspensions for unpaid traffic tickets is kind of how we talk about it. The second change is the partial payment allowance for the $680 reinstatement fee. And I'll talk about when that applies. That's not for, there's not a $680 reinstatement fee for all suspensions and revocations, just for certain ones. And then third, I'll talk about the new license that is being created as a result of the legislation that Jovan Gentle was testifying on, the video that you just saw, Mr. Gentle talking about the challenge of getting his license back after releasing from incarceration. I want to be clear up front, the reintegration license isn't available yet. That legislation goes into effect April 1, 2024. So the process for application and issuance of that license is being developed right now, but we want to make sure that folks know that's coming. I think that'll be an important tool for people releasing from incarceration as of April 2024. And Jamie, if you can advance the slides, that'd be great. Thanks. Okay, so it used to be prior to 2021 that in Minnesota, if you failed to pay a traffic ticket or failed to appear in court on a traffic-related violation, or if you were convicted of driving after suspension or revocation, any of those were reasons for a license suspension. And actually, the vast majority of license suspensions were for one of those reasons. The position of my organization that I worked for then, Minnesota Asset Building Coalition, and also a Fines and Fees Justice Center where I work now, is that license suspensions should not be used for non-driving related violations. In other words, license suspensions are appropriate for dangerous driving situations and to enhance public safety on the roads. Suspensions should never be used to coerce payment or to punish a payment-related violation. So legislation that passed in 2021 ended suspensions for any payment-related violation, so failure to pay on any traffic violation. For failure to appear, it's a little different. It ended suspensions for failure to appear on petty traffic driver's violations. So that would be like a speeding ticket, running a red light, lane change, equipment violations. Failure to appear on a more serious driving violation, say reckless driving, can still result in a suspension, but not failure to appear on a petty misdemeanor. And third, and the category that ended up in terms of numbers being the most impactful, is that Minnesota no longer suspends driver's license for a conviction for driving after suspension or revocation. And most folks probably know, but if you get a ticket for driving after suspension and you pay that ticket, payment is an admission of guilt and it results in a conviction. And it used to be that that would lead to a suspension. So sometimes very well-meaning practitioners would be advising their clients to pay their DAS and DAR tickets, and payment actually triggered a resuspension of their license. You might be surprised when we explained to legislators that that was the current practice. Most of them didn't know. Many of them were appalled. Many of them could recognize how counterproductive it is to resuspend the license of somebody who's proactively trying to pay off their tickets. And so we were able to include that in the driver's license suspension reform. Jamie, can you switch slides? So at this point, those suspensions should not be happening proactively for any of those 3 categories. If they are, on the last slide, I have information for where you should contact if somebody is suspended incorrectly. For folks who are already suspended or who are currently suspended for one of those reasons, we were able to get a retroactive provision passed that says that they are now eligible for reinstatement if they don't have other unrelated holds on their license. So for instance, if somebody has, let's say, a child support hold on their license, they would need to resolve that before they were eligible for reinstatement. But if the holds on their license are only related to failure to pay, failure to appear on a petty misdemeanor, or conviction on DAS or DAR, that person should be eligible for reinstatement. They do need to go into the DVS and ask for their license to be reinstated, and they likely have to pay a $20 reinstatement fee. It's really important, the last bullet on this slide, they don't need to pay off old fines and fees in order to be eligible for reinstatement. Old fines and fees they won't go away, they don't disappear. The state of Minnesota has a collections process through the Department of Revenue where the fines may be taken out of a person's tax return. They can have their wages garnished. That's a separate process of collections, and that is not changed. But those unpaid fines and fees are no longer a hold on somebody's license. Jamie, if you could advance the slide. Thanks. So the second category of law change I want to talk about is actually not one that we worked on, this team on the screen here, but as I've talked to people, because I talk to people all the time about license suspensions and revocations, this is a change that went into effect a couple of years ago that I think has not gotten a lot of visibility and people don't know to ask for it. So I really wanted to include it in the training today. If someone has their license revoked for a DUI or other substance-related driving violation, so it could be a test refusal, there are a number of different violations related to substance abuse and driving. Those revocations carry a $680 reinstatement fee, which I probably don't need to emphasize, but it is just an incredible barrier for a lot of the folks that we work with. I recently talked to a woman who had finally gotten her license back after 7 years. She had been trying to get $680 ahead so that she could pay that reinstatement fee and get her license back. There's a new availability as of 2021 that anybody, regardless of income, can pay the $680 in 2 installments and get their license reinstated upon the first reinstallment payment. So a person can go into DVS, they pay $365, that's the first installment, and they can have their license reinstated at that point. That reinstatement is good for 2 years, and then after 2 years, they do need to go in and make the second installment of $315, at which point their license is fully reinstored. And if they don't make the second installment payment, their license would be revoked until they can come in and pay that. We have been working with the call center, the public information center. We're asking them to proactively notify people that this is an option. I don't think that they're regularly doing that yet. So people do have to ask, which is why it's so important to get the word out there. We recognize that $365 is still a pretty high cost for a lot of people, but we hope that this will help some people get that license back a little faster. Jamie, if you could advance. Thank you. Last, I want to talk about the reintegration driver's license. Again, this is a license that is created specifically for folks releasing from incarceration. It's not available yet. It will be available April 1 of 2024. But so it's called the reintegration driver's license. And it's really, our goal was to create a temporary license for folks releasing from incarceration that was no cost and that would help them kind of jump over some of the hurdles to license reinstatement, just recognizing how many challenges folks are facing upon release, often have to meet a whole smorgasbord of conditions of release, including meeting with therapists or counselors. They're trying to reunify with their family, and it's really difficult to meet those conditions without driving. Jamie, if you could advance it. So a couple of things I want you to know about the reintegration license. It's available at no cost, meaning people do not have to pay off all their fines and fees. There's no application cost for the license. Our goal was really to make it a $0 cost to get this license. It is a temporary license, so it's not exactly the same as a regular driver's license, but it will look exactly the same as a regular driver's license. Just the expiration date will be set 15 months out. So it's a 15-month license. If that driver if they commit a new offense that would result in the suspension or revocation of a license, then the reintegration driver's license is canceled. That doesn't mean that it would be canceled for a speeding ticket, right? A speeding ticket doesn't cancel or doesn't suspend your license. We don't expect people to be perfect. But if someone commits a new violation like reckless driving that results in a license suspension, the reintegration license would be canceled. But if they are able to hold onto that license for 12 months, not be reincarcerated, and not commit any new violations that would result in a suspension or revocation, then they can go into DVS and renew that license as a regular driver's license. They don't have to pay any reinstatement fees. They don't have to pay off any old traffic-related fines and fees. They will have to pay, I think it's $26 or $28, the regular application fee for a license renewal. I want you to just notice that the license is valid for 15 months. After 12 months, someone can go in and get that renewed as a regular license. So there, we created a 3-month window there for somebody to renew their reintegration license as a regular driver's license. Advance the slide, thank you. Who's eligible for the reintegration license? It's not available to everybody. We really tried to draw the line where we do feel like license suspension and revocations are appropriate for folks who are presenting a danger on the road, but not for folks that are struggling with payment or other collateral consequences. To be eligible, somebody needs to have been incarcerated for at least 180 days. They need to apply for the reintegration license within a year of release. And their driver's license can be suspended for any combination of the following: unpaid fines and fees, unpaid reinstatement fees. So for instance, that $680, this is a way to avoid needing to pay that $680, insurance-related violations, or habitual violator suspension. So if somebody is convicted of 4 or more petty misdemeanor traffic tickets in a year, they are suspended as a habitual violator. This would supersede that, because we know some people are released from incarceration, pay off a bunch of old tickets, and then are suspended as a habitual violator, even if those violations occurred prior to incarceration. And we don't think that makes any sense. Jamie, can you advance? Thank you. Who is not eligible for a reintegration driver's license? You're not, if you are required to use ignition interlock as part of the requirements of regaining your license, this would not replace or supersede that. You would still need to participate in the ignition interlock program. If your license is canceled as inimical to public safety, canceled IPS, which usually happens after multiple DUI violations, this is not available to you. If you have a criminal vehicular operation violation, so for instance, criminal vehicular homicide, some of those violations carry a statutory revocation period, and this would not supersede a statutory revocation period, say a 12-month revocation that's ordered by the courts. And if you have an unresolved claim for child support, you need to deal with that first. You don't need to be all up to date on child support, but you do need to have a payment plan in place and have that hold released. And then you're eligible for the reintegration license. Jamie, will you advance? Thank you. We know that the ending of license suspensions for failure to pay or appear on traffic tickets and for conviction on DAS, DIR has not been implemented with 100% uniformity and accuracy. We also know that people are getting some misinformation or inconsistent information from hearing officers or sometimes at the DVS window. And so we've asked DVS, what is the remedy for folks who believe they might be getting incorrect information? So I want to say 2 things. The one up on the slide is the official answer, which is that that person needs to contact the Public Information Center. That is the line that handles any driver's license or state ID questions. I've got the number and the email up there. We've used this when we're working with clients who have gotten some incorrect information, and we usually do get a response pretty quickly. So I would really ask folks to use this as your first remedy if you believe somebody has received incorrect information or is not being allowed to have their license reinstated when they should be eligible. However, if this doesn't work, what I'm really asking is that you reach out to us. And I think my contact information is on, I'm actually not sure if it's on the last slide or if there's a way for folks to reach out to me. Let me figure out how I can share that. Because we are trying to track where it's not being implemented correctly. And we've been having ongoing conversations with the Department of Public Safety and DVS to try to ensure that things are implemented across the state. So let me see, but before the end of this presentation, let me figure out how to get my contact information out to you. So if you really run into a barrier with somebody you're working with, I would ask that you reach out to me so that I can be tracking that and try to help you resolve it. So at the end of our presentation, I would love to take questions, but I think I am going to turn it over to, yeah, thank you. Turn it over to Eve for the next section of our presentation. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anna. And I also have slides that I'm going to share. So let me set this up so that folks are able to see this. Let's see. I will note, so I'm going to focus on the advocacy efforts with regard to the recent legislative changes, and in particular as it relates to the reintegration driver's license. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. So before I start talking specifically about the advocacy effort, I want to provide a little bit of background on the Minnesota Collaborative Justice Project. And so this is something that I mentioned at the start and that Jamie talked about. So this is a collective impact project. And so that means that it's a project that's designed from the start to bring together diverse stakeholders to pool their knowledge and resources to address persistent societal problems. The Minnesota Collaborative Project was launched 7 or so years ago, and it was designed to develop a plan and implement a plan to improve the experiences of formerly incarcerated individuals returning to the community in Minnesota. The participating organizations include nonprofit organizations, law firms, companies, legal services organizations, Minnesota Probation and Pretrial Services, Minnesota Department of Corrections, and more. And we have a brief video that I'm going to share that will tell you a little bit more about the Minnesota Collaborative Justice Project.
I'm part of a group that runs a project in Minnesota called the Minnesota Collaborative Justice Project, and it focuses on prisoner reentry. We have individuals who've designed a reentry planning course that is taught in prisons in this state. We have a policy and advocacy component that works on legislation and changes to rules and regulations that could benefit reentering folks. We have a working group that I chair. It's called Access to Services, and it's aimed at improving housing, healthcare, identification, civil legal services, transportation, employment, housing, all of the things that oftentimes become barriers to successful reentry. We have a subcommittee that's called the Civil Legal Needs Initiative. And that particular subcommittee works on finding volunteer lawyers to handle civil legal problems for reentering folks. Those civil legal problems can become huge barriers to successful reentry, whether it's old child support orders, whether it's trying to get a driver's license, whether it's getting an acceptable form of identification, whether it's dealing with debt, child custody, child support, child visitation, divorce, all of those kinds of things. We try to provide volunteer lawyers to deal with these kinds of problems. You know, you have to build a level of trust with these folks because they look at you and they wonder, what's the hook? Why are you doing this? And the answer to that is really pretty simple. It's because we believe that society. I'm part of a group that runs a project.
So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. But Jim gives a great summary of what the Minnesota Collaborative Justice Project focuses on. And as mentioned, there are 3 primary areas. One is reentry planning, which is providing programming and services to people while they're incarcerated. The other is access to services that focuses on the services needed once someone is released. And this includes our focus on addressing civil legal needs that are acting as barriers to successful reentry. And then the third is policy and advocacy. So, and this is designed to address common barriers that impact the reentry community as a whole. So the need to prioritize driver's license is an issue that has come up in all aspects of the work: reentry planning, access to services, as well as our policy and advocacy work. Routinely, what we're seeing, and Jamie mentioned this and Anna mentioned this, is that not having a driver's license, not being able to access a driver's license, is keeping people from finding and keeping a job, securing housing, being able to see their kids and support their kids, as Javon mentioned as part of his testimony, attending meetings with case managers, and fulfilling other obligations of supervision. Where we see the driver's license issue create the most barriers is with regard to the work that Jamie talked about at the beginning of the presentation, and that's the work that's trying to address civil legal needs and eliminate the barriers to reentry. And driver's license is a problem that we routinely see the participants that we're working with, the clients that we're working with, trying to deal with. Our Civil Legal Needs Initiative is designed to provide pro bono legal services to individuals to address the legal matters that act as barriers to reentry. This is work that's done in collaboration with a host of organizations and individuals. It includes Central Minnesota Legal Services, the Voluntary Lawyers Network. Jamie mentioned Joelle Sather, who is with the Hennepin Public Defender Service. We work very closely with the District of Minnesota Reentry Court Program and provide support and legal services to participants in Minnesota's Reentry Court. And then, as Jamie mentioned, all of this is being facilitated by our Equal Justice Works fellow, Hillary Richard, and routinely Hillary and Jamie and Joelle are working together to support individuals who are unable to secure their driver's license. As mentioned, we also have our policy and advocacy group. And so this is the effort that is advocating for changes in policies and practice that create systemic barriers to reentry. And this is also something that is done in collaboration with community partners and other experts like Anna and Jamie to bring about changes that impacts the system as a whole. The work of our policy and advocacy group is informed by a number of things. So one, the stories that are coming out of the representation that's being provided as part of the Civil Legal Needs Initiative, what we're hearing from our community partners with regard to what they're seeing in providing services to returning individuals, the perspectives of the participants in the District of Minnesota's Reentry Court, and this applies to the people that we're directly serving by providing legal assistance, but also the participants generally who are sharing with Reentry Court the challenges they're having day in, day out, trying to successfully reintegrate into the community. We also take a national perspective. So we consider practices and policies that are adopted in other jurisdictions that may be beneficial to Minnesota. And much of the work that we do is very strategic, but it's also very organic. So Jamie talked about at the beginning, talking to Gina, who connects her to Anna, who connects her to Joelle. And so that's a large part of how we're organizing as well, sort of naturally responding to what we're seeing on the ground. The work with the reintegration driver's license began in 2021, and it started with members of the Policy and Advocacy Working Group researching innovative practices in the US around driver's license. And we shared that research with a then senator in Minnesota who had demonstrated an interest in reentry issues. He had worked with Jamie and others on a bill that was passed that would allow for prison IDs to count as secondary identification for purposes of securing a driver's license. There are at least 2 other jurisdictions in the United States that have similar provisions to the reintegration driver's license. One is Louisiana, and that provision is most similar to Minnesota in that it allows for a 1-year driver's license to be issued to folks who've been previously incarcerated. This is for anyone who's had their driver's license revoked prior to incarceration. And so it, again, allows them an opportunity to drive immediately upon release. The other jurisdiction is Mississippi. And this provisional driver's license is a bit more restrictive than Louisiana's and is certainly more restrictive than what was adopted in Minnesota. It is a 6-month license. And unlike what was adopted in Minnesota, in Mississippi, there are restrictions on where the driver can go. So it's a license that allows someone to go to work, to go to school, to go to church or to other religious institutions, but it is not a blanket license. So there are some limitations on what a person can do in Mississippi with regard to their provisional license. At the time we were considering the reintegration driver's license, most of the legislative reform that we were seeing across the United States we're focusing on some of what Anna was talking about as it relates to driving after suspension and driving after revocation. And so they were enacting bills that either were ending suspension of driver's license due to unpaid fines and fees or due to legal violations unrelated to dangerous driving. We've also seen efforts in some jurisdictions to amend practices around fines and fees totally. So either reducing or eliminating certain fees on the front end for all, or based on the ability to pay, as well as reducing or forgiving certain fees after they already have been incurred. So the reason that we pushed for the reintegration driver's license, in addition to the other changes that Anna talked about, is that we were looking for a practical solution. We wanted something that would get folks driving safely as soon as possible. We also recognized that in many jurisdictions, there was already understanding of the importance of securing identification immediately upon release, and not necessarily a driver's license, but identification immediate upon release, whether this was temporary or permanent. And so there was an understanding that this was a key component of successful reentry. And also, Minnesota already provides for a temporary driver's license, and the Minnesota temporary driver's license is probably most similar to the Mississippi driver's license that I mentioned earlier. So it is a license that would allow someone to access certain things, getting to and from school, substance abuse programming, medical appointments, and this would be available to anyone, not just returning individuals. And so we thought the reintegration driver's license, because of these three reasons, was really right with regard to changes in Minnesota. We first introduced the reintegration driver's license in 2021, and we had bipartisan support, which was fantastic. It didn't pass that year, but we reintroduced it in 2022, again with bipartisan support. It was also supported by a number of community partners. We had folks submit letters in support during key times of the legislative process. And this was from diverse groups in the community. It included the Minnesota Corrections Association, the Salvation Army, Ujamaa Place, Volunteers of America, and more. And we received great technical assistance from a number of agencies, including the Department of Corrections, the Department of Human Services, and the Department of Public Safety. And so the reason that I'm sharing this is that collaboration really has been key to the work that we have been doing. And without the expertise of the people on this panel and the support and engagement, feedback, insight from so many more in the community, this would not have been a successful effort. And so the role of collaboration, again, has been key and is an important part of the advocacy effort of the Minnesota Collaborative Justice Project, but also efforts in supporting returning individuals through legislative change. And I believe we have one more video to show before we open it up for questions and answers. And hopefully this will work a bit more smoothly than the first.
Growing up in Chicago, I sold drugs as a teen. I sold drugs as an adult. You know, you can't sell drugs as a career, it's illegal. I'm a convict, I'm an ex-felon. I'm living proof of change. I got kicked out of high school as a sophomore, and I chose to be in the streets. It was just seeing the older guys drive nice cars, you know, and I wanted that. And so the best way and the fastest way to me was to do what they were doing. I mean, I lived the street life. I got shot up. You can see a scar right here on my neck. I got shot in the trachea, went out my back, pierced my lungs. I left there and moved to Minnesota in 1990. And I called myself moving my enterprise here to Minnesota because they said it was more money here. You know, but it wasn't just more money here, it was actually the feds here too. I was convicted of selling 240 grams of crack cocaine. I felt like the world came crashing down on me, like my life was over. I was sentenced to 240 months federal prison. That's 20 years. I just said, I'm gonna use this time and educate myself. So I ended up enrolling in Lamar State University. I took all kind of classes to help me change my thinking, the way that I think. I did 17 and a half years of that 20-year sentence. I came home when COVID first hit in 2020. It looked like one of those movies where you didn't see nobody. All the downtowns were closed down. The few people that I saw, heads were down like this. So I don't know why everybody's head down. And I looked at their cell phones. So I'm like, wow, where am I? I did 17 and a half straight years in the federal prison. So now imagine me being out of society for 17 and a half years. I needed some help. As an ex-felon, you may think you have a lot of friends, but you will learn about friends when you go in due time. It's hard to get jobs. It's hard to get housing. You will learn who really loves and care about you and who don't. The help you can get through reentry court, it's incredible. Just the resources, it's amazing. If you have child support, they have people to help you with that. You need your license, they have people to help you with that. They have mentors that's there to help you. So the only way you don't succeed is because you don't want to succeed. Can't nobody make me change but me. So what I like to do now is I like to mentor people myself. I do community outreach, trying to help the youth get off the streets, put the guns down, and the best way to do that is asking them, how can I help? I don't have no fear. And they see that, about this man, he sits with these guns, he ain't even scared to walk up on us. No, I'm not. How can I help? I can't come out here and tell you, don't do this, don't do that. The first thing they say, oh, well, look what you did. Look what I'm doing now. Look how I'm living now. I live just as good as I did when I was on the streets. I live even better now. If you don't change the way you think, you're not gonna change. You'll end up right back in prison. But like I said, it all started with me changing my thinking from a criminal lifestyle to a pro-social lifestyle. That's the whole program is amazing. Because I have some associates, when you're in the federal system, and I told them about the program, and they're like, man, we don't have nothing like that here. So I prayed, and I continue to pray, and I continue to say, please bring reentry court to all, wherever they have the federal court system, please bring reentry court there because it really helps us big time. If it hadn't have been for reentry court and the help that I received from reentry court and the U.S. Probation Office, I don't know where I would be. Since I've changed, everything's so positive happening in my life. Like I said, I started work with Canadian Pacific Railroad as a train conductor. I used to love trains when I was growing up. So I'm seeing like I'm getting a little emotional because I'm happy. Thank you guys for helping me with that transition and that change.
Fantastic. I love that video, and I've seen it tons and tons of times. So I believe we now have time for Q&A.
And I do not see any questions in the chat at this time. One of the things that I know I forgot to mention was I really want to give thanks to the DMV for the relationship that we're starting to build with them. Behind the scenes, we've met with them, we've given them some of our thoughts, some of our ideas, and I just wanted to throw that out there. The Department of Corrections, the DMV, they all seem to be on board with all that we're doing.
Yep, so I'll add just one thing, piggybacking right on what Jamie said, which is that especially for the reintegration license, like I said, that process for applying and qualifying for that license is being developed right now. And we really appreciate that the Department of Public Safety and DVS has been in conversation with us about that. We are trying, for instance, to have it be as accessible as possible in terms of what kinds of documentation people are required to provide and where people can apply for that license. We don't have all the answers to that yet. I know Jamie is keeping a list of folks that are interested so that we can give updates on that license and the application process as we have them from the Department of Public Safety. So that would be a reason to get in touch with us as well if you'd like to make sure that you're on that list, so that when we are clear on how to apply for the reintegration license, we really want to make sure that we get that information out to folks.
Yes, I have a running list already on an Excel sheet, and there's over 200 people's names on there. And when I do have information, I try to BC, so I'm not giving out your email address, just to make sure you have the information. And it oftentimes it could go to spam. So if you do get on the list and you see from community_intervention@mnp.us courts, that's coming from me. It's not spam.
So Anna, I actually have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in your new role, you are focused on not just Minnesota, but more broadly how fines and fees are impacting communities as it relates to driver's license and potentially other issues. And I mentioned that one of the things that's important in informing the advocacy effort of the Minnesota Collaborative Justice is taking a national perspective and understanding what's happening in other jurisdictions, and if there are innovative practices that can be applied and can better things for folks in Minnesota. Are there things that you're seeing in your new role that you think sort of generally we as a community of people concerned about justice issues and want to support those who are justice involved should know about, or that folks in Minnesota should consider moving forward?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking me that. Yeah, so, states are in a variety of places along the continuum of reform. So, for instance, I'm working in Ohio where they haven't passed any reform around license suspension. They're still suspending licenses for failure to pay, failure to appear, et cetera, all the way to so Michigan, for instance, has passed a similar reform where they're no longer suspending for those reasons. And the folks I'm working with there have moved on to try to eliminate and reduce other fines and fees. Some of the work I'm most excited about are really eliminating reinstatement fees altogether, understanding that a fine is a penalty for a behavior. A judge has discretion over the amount of a fine. It can be scaled to ability to pay. Fees tend to be a set amount that are essentially a way to fund our criminal legal system. I mean, they're essentially a tax. And our position is that we should not be funding the criminal legal system on the backs of folks who often are the least able to pay, and that fees should simply be eliminated. So that's some exciting work. And we're really working on eliminating fees, both kind of like court and pretrial fees, but also in custody fees. So phone call fees for folks that are incarcerated, commissary fees. Sometimes there's a significant fee just for a family member to deposit some money in a person's commissary account. So we're working on eliminating those kinds of fees in a number of states. Another area that I'm excited about is that some states are really starting to work on how to reduce some of the barriers for folks who end up with an auto insurance related ticket. Driving without insurance is still a reason for revocation in Minnesota. And the hurdles to reinstatement after an insurance related ticket are pretty steep here and other places. And Michigan and Illinois, for instance, are two states that are really looking at how do we start reducing those barriers, making it a little easier for folks to get back to valid driver status after an insurance violation. So those are some areas that I think Minnesota could also be looking at.
Fantastic. And I'm curious, when we were doing sort of the initial research around the reintegration driver's license, the issue of either reducing or eliminating fees, whether it's for everyone or on ability to pay, has been very controversial. Are you starting to see that there's more bipartisan support for those types of bill proposals?
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's different in different states. The position of Fines and Fees Justice Center is that fees should be eliminated. Fines should be scaled to ability to pay, and fees should not be part of the way that we fund our system. I would say that there is actually quite a contingent of kind of more left-leaning folks that recognize the burden that fees put on especially low-income BIPOC families and are in favor of reducing or eliminating them. There's also a pretty big contingent of folks more on the left side of the, or more on the right side of the political spectrum, that view some of those fees as government overreach. It's essentially like an additional tax. And that for folks that are looking at, who are in favor of smaller government and less taxes on our, our families, they are often in favor of reducing or eliminating those fees as well. So yes, it's a bipartisan issue. It's a matter of finding the allies that we have in states, but also my experience is that the very best way to bring people onto the team of allies and champions for this is to share individual personal stories. So stories like Jovan's story, one of the testifiers on the bill here in Minnesota that ended license suspension for failure to pay tickets was a woman named Leah, who talked about getting that one ticket for taking a left on a red light when she had just gotten a new apartment, was trying to save up to make sure she could pay her rent, and so defaulted on that ticket. And she led legislators through the story of how defaulting on one ticket led to, several driving after suspension charges because she had 2 part-time jobs, one of which required her to drive. And so she continued driving so she wouldn't lose her employment and her income, ended up with DAS tickets. When she paid those, it bumped the cost of her insurance. And she kind of led legislators through the story of how that one ticket ended up costing her in the long run. Her estimate was $17,000.
Wow.
And I think when legislators hear that story, they don't necessarily know that's happening out there. And yes, we can get folks on both sides of the political spectrum on board for these reforms.
That's fantastic. And I love that sort of focusing legislation on stories on individuals is really impactful and moving, and it helps people to understand the importance of what's being proposed. And Jamie, I know we mentioned a little bit Minnesota's reentry court. And that's one of the places that for the Collaborative Justice Project where we're hearing these stories, we're hearing about what's happening to the participants in reentry court and the challenges that they're facing in trying to reintegrate into the community successfully. And that's where we've heard a lot of these driver's license stories. So can you tell folks a little bit more about reentry court?
Sure. It is a therapeutic court with all kinds of services from driver's license assistance to identification. There are 2 judges. One is in the morning session, one is in the afternoon session. So the morning session would look like this. If you were invited to participate, you would come from 9 to 10 and you would be in that program for 15 to 18 months. And you would have a mentor, you would have all the extra services, because if Eve isn't in reentry court, which now Hillary is in reentry court, I was in reentry court as the social worker, and now Hillary kind of tells me the things that are going on. But there's a prosecutor, there's the public defender, and then there's a great, amazing video that I am going to put in to our Google Drive after this. I didn't think about it. That will tell the heartwarming story of the probation officer and how he leads the way. And at the end, we have a graduation, but it really surrounds people with supportive services during their time of change. And most of the people have been in for 10, 12, 15 years. Patrick was in reentry court. Jovan was in reentry court. And it's actually how I ended up being in the job I'm in. I started at Waseca. I started attending because I had a client released from Waseca, a female client. I followed her on her pathway. And then when this position came open, I transitioned and it was just a nice fit. I know we only have like 2 minutes left. And Gina asked legislative priorities for 2024. I think we hit a little bit on that, but is there any extra that you want to talk about in the last 2 minutes? 1 minute, maybe?
Well, I do want to just say, one of my real priorities for 2024 is ensuring the accurate and kind of universal implementation of all 3 of these reforms, including that reintegration license being rolled out in April. So I don't know if that's not a new legislative priority, but sometimes making sure implementation goes smoothly is as effective, as important as getting the legislation passed.
And lastly, I just want to say from my end, when we meet again with DMV, if you have some ideas that maybe you don't think we've thought of, which very is likely because we can't think of everything, please email them. As we sit at the table with the DMV, we want to know. We've been reaching out to the DOC, asking for stories. We want to know how to make this best rollout. We already know asking for a passport is not going to be a best rollout because many of my clients would not have a passport. They had to surrender them. So any ideas? And I promise we're going to host a training in March, right before the rollout. I've already committed to that.
Excellent. And I think we're at time.
Thank you everyone for attending, and let us know how we can be of help to you and your organization.
Thank you.
Thank you.